Well, good morning, everybody. It's Good Friday, and over here just outside London, it's an absolutely beautiful day, 20 odd degrees, clear blue sky. In fact, I think this is typical of the weather across the UK for this Good Friday, and hopefully much of the bank holiday weekend, if not all of it. Very unusual for this part of the world to have a sunny bank holiday in May, but I'm not complaining. Anyway, I hope everyone's well, and it's a little while since I posted uploaded the last video, which was the Ducati test ride, where somehow I went from an average of about, 120 views for this very new channel to, at the moment, something over 13,000. I found it all pretty funny actually, but I'm sure normal service is about to be resumed. So today I want to talk about new riders, and in fact this upload is called Motorcycling 5 Tips for New Riders. Being fairly new myself, having come back to biking after a few decades of a break, I consider myself new anyway. Some of this is based on my own experience and the mistakes that I've made, so I'm hoping it'll be useful to people. Okay, so tip number 1, and that is to test ride different styles of bike and find out which one is right for you, and preferably do this before you spend too much money on gear. I'll talk about the gear you need for riding a little later. So there are cruisers, sort of modern classics or retro bikes, sports roadsters, and out-and-out sports bikes, and each of these have different characteristics in terms of performance and handling, and somewhere within that mix you'll find out what you think you like to ride. And I said think for a reason, and more of that in a second. The other thing worth bearing in mind is that there's also a different kind of image and culture attached to each of those styles of bike, and it may be that you've identified one of those as how you see yourself when you're biking, and this is really just a word of warning that the image you have of yourself on a bike may not match the performance that you're looking for from your bike. And an obvious case in point would be the difference in performance between something along the lines of a Harley, which has a very specific image and culture, of course, and a Panigale V4. If you see yourself riding a Harley, but you like riding a Panigale, then you've got some thinking to do. And I guess leading on from that, I'm going to go on to tip number 2. That is, that if you can, I think you should probably avoid buying new for your first bike. As you grow more experienced, you'll realise that in many ways power is just a number, and what can appear really daunting when you start on your biking journey, your motorcycling journey, becomes anything but daunting once you've got a few miles under your belt. Wrong decisions can be costly, so buying well at the beginning will allow you to move your bike on, should you want to, that is, without taking a financial hit, or without taking too much of a financial hit. And I've been in that position. My first bike was a Triumph Street Twin. It was 54 horsepower, and it matched the image that I saw of myself when I was, when I made my decision to get back into biking. Long story short, I took it in for a 500-mile oil and filter change, and I tested the Street Triple, which is, I think, 116 brake horsepower, so more than double the power of the Twin. And I upgraded. I call it an upgrade. I chopped my Twin, which was only a month old. I chopped that in, and I bought the Street Triple instead. Both of those bikes were bought new, and I didn't do myself any favours at all in terms of values and expenditure. So the other thing I would say, by the way, if you buy used, either try to ensure that you buy from a dealer, it doesn't have to be a main dealer, but a reputable dealer with a warranty, or learn what to look out for when you buy a used motorbike. I'm not going to go into that now. There's loads of information out there for you to do your own research, or I suppose you could take a friend who knows bikes more than you do. So that is tip number 2. Tip number 3, now this is a really important one actually. Understand how to build up your budget, because although you'll be focusing on what you want to spend on a bike, there are some necessities in addition to the cost of the bike, and this can come as quite a shock to new riders. Now, it includes insurance, and that's one thing you've got to be really careful of, because as a newbie and without any no claims discount, and potentially, like I found, with a claims record on your car, you could be facing a very, very hefty insurance premium in year 1. And if you don't have a massive budget, if you're looking at £2,000, £3,000, £4,000 to spend on a bike, you could find that your insurance premium is pushing, I don't know, 50% of that value quite easily. So think about the totality of your spend. So there's your bike, obviously, the insurance, which I've just covered, protective gear, because you cannot ride without protective gear. So that's helmet, jacket, trousers, gloves and boots. As a minimum, I mean, you have to have those things. I know some people ride without protective trousers, but I think, okay, perhaps pooling around town you might get away with it, but on a long and fast ride, you have to protect your knees and your legs as much as you have to protect your and your hips, for that matter, as much as you have to protect your back and your shoulders and your elbow and your head. So have a look online. If you're in the UK, then somewhere like Sports Bike Shop, I would recommend wholeheartedly. They're cheap, great service, deliver quickly, got great stock. Price everything up, get some insurance quotes, and add that to what you're spending on a bike, because that will be your initial startup budget. One thing, by the way, in terms of jackets, a little tip. You can get away with one jacket all year round, but it's almost impossible to ride in comfort with one jacket all year round. So I would suggest you need 2. You need a properly warm winter jacket if you're going to be out in the winter, and you need to make sure that it has a removable thermal lining. For the autumn and the spring, you can use that same jacket with the lining removed. So instead of being a winter jacket, it becomes a kind of mid-season jacket, and then you just need something for the summer, maybe a mesh, either leather or textile, something a bit lighter weight, but obviously still with armour. So that way you have 2 jackets that will cover you for 4 seasons. Okay, on to tip number 4. And that is a simple one. You just need to remember that a motorbike is far less practical than a car. It's more fun. Well, I think it's more fun, but it's less practical, and that's for the obvious reasons. So you can't carry as much, and if you've chosen it to be your only form of transport, you need to give a fair amount of thought to how you're going to do your shopping, how you're going to get to work and back with the things you need. If you're a commuter, you need to think about how you're going to travel with your partner, who may, or if you have a partner who may or may not like riding pillion, and all those other things that we take for granted when we have a car. So again, a motorbike is potentially a lot more fun than a car, which is why we ride them. Is it as practical? In reality, no, it isn't. So take that into account in terms of your lifestyle. And finally, tip number 5, and that is, as a new rider, you need to understand the risk profile of riding a motorbike and then mitigate that risk as much as you can. When I say understand the risk profile, I think most people who are thinking of buying a bike or are about to buy a bike will be aware that accident statistics indicate that there are far more injuries and fatalities for motorcyclists than there are for car drivers. Cars act as cages, protective cages around the occupiers, and we're right out in the open and completely vulnerable when we're out on the road on a bike. So, you know, when I say risk profile, I think it should be pretty obvious what I mean. So how can you mitigate? I think there are 3 ways, primarily anyway, that you can do this. And first of all, that's to wear proper gear. And if you choose not to wear proper gear, then at least make sure that you understand the consequences of coming off your bike without protection, so that it's an informed choice. And that goes for helmet choice as well, where you could go full face and you could go open face. The risk profile of an open face helmet is very, very different to that of a full face helmet. So do your homework, do your research, and choose sensibly. The second way to mitigate the risk is to learn the craft, and there are both safety and advanced riding courses widely available, and my suggestion would be that you plan and budget to take advantage of some of those courses, certainly over the first 6 to 12 months of your riding journey. And at the very least, understand what defensive riding means. I'm not going to define it now, because again, it's something that you can look up and research, understand what it means, and practice it when it's appropriate to do so. For example, in an urban environment when you're riding in traffic. That's not the only scenario that is important, but it's one where it's primarily important, more so than in other sort of environments and circumstances. And the last way you can mitigate risk is to do your basic bike checks before you ride. So that would include chain, lights, fluids, that's oil, brakes and water, your brakes, tyres, steering, all of those things. And if you find that you don't do that every time you get on your bike, lots of people don't, and if I'm being completely honest, I'm one of them, then at least do it regularly. And unless you have shaft or belt drive on your bike, then be prepared to clean and lube your chain on a regular basis. Now again, I'm not going to use this video to define what regular basis means. You need to buy some books, go online, do some research. There's just tons and tons of information out there as to how often you should be doing these things. And they are my 5 tips. If I'd had these conversations with someone before I bought my first bike, then I think I'd have found it really helpful. I would certainly have saved some money, and I would have felt a little bit wiser and a little bit better prepared for the first time that I jumped on my bike. And I suspect it would have been a better bike for me than my first bike turned out to be. So I hope that's helpful. Enjoy your bank holiday weekend, everybody. If you liked the video, then please give it the thumbs up and hit the subscribe button, and I will catch you next time.